So here are the shoes. Somebody just grabbed me and said, you do have the loudest shoes in the entire conference. So being that this is an Agile conference, I'll start with a definition of done, what I want to achieve in this talk, and hopefully what you get out of it. The first thing is to get an idea of why true Agile adoptions are so difficult. And for your particular Agile adoptions, 4 things I'd like you to remember based on my experience over the past, it's now been 5 years across 2 financial services companies. Third being that this is the last session, hopefully you're entertained, if by nothing else than by my shoes, and enough time for questions. So just some background in terms of the scale and the approach we took to the Agile transformation. This started, this was in a large financial services institution and started around late 2010. As you must all know, there is no end, but that's sort of when it began, when we officially decided to do a large-scale Agile transformation. And this is, again, within the context of a large investment bank or financial services institution. And this may be a topic for another talk, but there is a big difference between a services company and a product company. And there is impact to an Agile transformation, namely in terms of product owner and what that role really means, but that's another talk. The actual scale was 7 cities, 4 countries, about 70 teams, and about 600 people. So that's the rough scale of the organization. And in terms of our approach to the adoption, we decided to do it right up front. We're not going to bake in any Scrum, but we're going to take the patterns as they were and try to implement them. Again, within the context of a large financial bureaucratic organization, but that was okay. We will take it, we had the backing of the right CIO, so we decided to go for it. The approach roughly was focus first on education. So whoever was going to be transformed, if you want to use that term, we got the best sort of certified Scrum Master training, BDD. If it was BDD, we'd get Dan North. If it was SBE, we got Goico. So before starting anyone, we got the best trainers and ensured, before we started the adoption, we ensured we had the best training up front, right? So we didn't use sort of the internal stuff. We got the external, expensive stuff. The second thing we did was, again, before starting the adoption, we understood the importance of continuous integration, automation, and you can't go to production every couple of weeks if you have a 2 to 3 week regression cycle and then at the end of it, another UAT cycle. So we invested heavily in automation, not just the tooling, but teaching the behaviors. Again, these are all prerequisites before we started the actual adoption. So education, engineering, then the adoption started. And and I keep on saying we, by the way, because this wasn't just me. As most of you know, this is usually a group of people involved in something like this. And some of them are in this room, so I don't want them to throw anything at me. We signaled, and you may have, if you listened to my talk last year, we decided we're going to start the creation of the feature teams by bringing all of the team members in the room and saying, select your own teams. This wasn't going to be a management exercise that was done in a spreadsheet where teams were pre-selected and said, you are now going to do this. We said, if we truly believe in these Agile principles, we're going to bring the teams into a room, or all team members into a room, and say, select your own teams based on this particular business problem. I won't get into the mayhem that ensued and what happened, because that's a topic for another, or a topic I discussed last year. But suffice it to say, after 3 hours, there were, in a room almost as big as this, there were many teams in the first region that we decided to start with the adoption. Second thing we did, again, we wanted to truly signal that this is a real Agile adoption and not just management speak. We said, if you are now a team, a self-organized team, what does having a manager even mean anymore, right? What does that even mean in that context? If you want a true multifunctional, self-organized team, What does it mean to tell your manager that you're not going to come in on Monday? Doesn't make sense. So we did away with the concept of that type of manager. And this is pretty revolutionary for a large investment bank, right? I think any company, right? And instead we said, you are now allowed, or we suggest, to select your own mentor as your line manager, right? And this was meant to have two intended consequences. The first is that it's again a signaling that we trust the teams to self-organize. You are now accountable to your teammates and to your product owner, not to your manager. And the second is that it's very hard to do a true agile adoption if management is telling people what to do. So that's the second thing we did. Again, there was a lot of unintended and intended consequences when you talk 3-4 years later in terms of that one move that we decided to do. So we had training, we had teams, we did away with the concept of a manager. We took very seriously the idea of visualizing the work, and we downplayed the use of tooling, right? So any tool vendors, put your head, do this, right? But what we tried to do was focus on visual management, which means we went to every single shop and bought every single Post-it note. We were strict in terms of co-location, right? So that, because a lot of the times you have to have tools because you have distributed teams across 5 regions. The team formation had to happen within a particular region. So co-location, self-organized teams. The resounding thing that I want you to walk away with the background was, within the context of a large financial service organization, we attempted to do it right. No corner cutting. So that wasn't the beginning. And what I want to talk about is some lessons learned from 3 years later, and now I'm also in another financial institution doing a very similar thing. So I'd like you to sort of, what have I learned, since this is a retrospective. So it wouldn't be a retro without a, let me walk here as well. It wouldn't be a retrospective without a 5 whys. Anyone ever do 5 whys to get to the underlying cause of? So I always get the question around, why is this so hard? Right? Why are true agile transformations so difficult? Don't I just need to do this, or don't I just need to do stand-ups, or we already do this, or right? I think you're overcomplicating it. So this is an oversimplified view of the world, and if you're a product company, this may not, or a small company, this may not make sense to you. But again, just to oversimplify, this is how traditional software is delivered in a large services organization. Just to quickly run through this, you probably have component development teams that have been working on a component for a very long time, a component being an isolated system. They probably have dev managers, and their dev managers probably have managers above them, and then on and on and on until you get to the CTO. Usually have a separate QA team, right? Again, none of this stuff you don't know, right? You have a team of business analysts. You have an architecture team, maybe sitting on ivory tower, or maybe sitting here, I don't know. And then you have a bunch of management, as I said, a project management team that kind of brings this all together, and a business person or a senior sponsor, whatever you call them within the context of your organization. And that senior business person is usually fed a steady diet of stuff, whether they're Gantt charts, 4 blockers, everything. The RAG status is green, 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 green until 2 weeks before go live, and it turns red. That's usually the diet that he's been fed over a very long period of time. Again, oversimplified version of the world, obviously. And then you go to the right-hand side. Oh, but I'm sorry, before you go to the right-hand side, some anti-patterns over the past 10, 15 years are baked into this model. Somebody had the great idea, probably around 2003 to 2008, and said that all of this stuff that happens down here, that's commoditized stuff. We do that in other countries, right? The whole movement to offshoring. So a lot of the great sort of development talent either left or went up into management, right? So if you had great software engineers, over the past 10, 15 years, they have become commoditized. They're called resources and are on spreadsheets, and they're stack ranked and all that kind of stuff. So lots of anti-patterns, this should all seem familiar. And we're saying agile transformation, let's just go to the right, right? Which is a senior business person or somebody like the Steve Jobs kind of guy that knows what he wants, that gets into the detail. And he talks to a bunch of people that kind of understand his business vision, understand the business problem, and deliver on that. So that's kind of where we're trying to get to. And interestingly enough, I did a thought experiment on the right-hand side. This has nothing to do with Scrum or Kanban or any of these methodologies. If a couple of months ago, I asked a bunch of people I respect around, if you look back to your career, to the greatest successes you've had, what does it look like? Like, what were the key pillars of the successes of that one project? And whatever you define as successful, but it doesn't matter. But when you look back in your career and you think, I think that project was successful, it always comes down to kind of three things. You know, there's a visionary business person that knew what he wanted, or a technology person, doesn't matter. But somebody knew what they wanted, wasn't afraid of the whiteboard marker, you know, wanted their hand on the steering wheel, wasn't afraid of transparency. And you had a bunch of people in a war room somewhere, working really hard, trusting each other, delivering to that person, right? That's not Scrum. That's not what, I mean, Scrum's trying to get you there, but that's kind of what it looks like, right? And you're trying to go from the left to the right. And it's very, very hard to do that because obviously you have a bunch of forces working against you. And we'll get into that a little later. So what as I go from client to client, do I see mostly? I call it the lipstick on the pig adoption, right? Which is exactly the same as this for the most part, but with brand new roles, right? So, go look, we do Scrum, we do it all, right? We have feature teams, we have Agile QA teams, we have Agile BAs, we have Agile architecture, right? A bunch of Scrum Masters at the top, right? You have the management still there. We have a product ownership team where there was once project managers, and then you have still the business guy, some people call him a chief product owner, but they get release burn downs now. Right, they don't get Gantt charts. And down here, what we do is we do stand-ups every day, right? And my first recommendation to this, and this may be controversial, is no, just call this waterfall. It's okay. You know, it's not a dirty word, right? Just it's waterfall. Just keep it. Keep it. It might actually suit what you're trying to do, because if you call this Scrum, the same problems will exist, but instead they'll blame Scrum. Right? It's a kind of fundamental point why I think you should avoid the lipstick on the pig adoptions, because what they will do is blame Scrum and poison the well for everyone else trying to do it. So it's okay when I come in and see this and people saying, you know what, this works great for us, I said, fantastic, but just call it waterfall and it's okay, no one will yell at you. All right, I'll talk to the CIO. So, that's the 5 whys, why it's so hard. Now I just want to get into 5 things that you should think about in terms of your agile transformation. And I promise I'll end on a high note. So in case people are thinking, it's not the way I wanted to end the conference, right? Somebody mentioned that there's one of the sessions talking about the culture. So apologies if you heard this before, but when you're trying to do an agile adoption, you're actually you're attempting to change the culture of the organization. And there is nothing harder. There just is nothing harder to do because you're changing behaviors, you're changing anti-patterns that have happened over the past 10, 15, 20 years. Just to give you an example, if you've had a business person that you're now calling the product owner that has been given a steady diet of rag statuses and hasn't had accountability because he can blame the project manager, the program manager, or blame the consultancy brought in, you're now putting him or her in the driver's seat, and now they have the accountability. They may not want that, right? Again, you're changing culture from a culture of obfuscation and opacity and all this kind of stuff, and 5 levels of disintermediation between the business person and the developer, and now you're saying, we're going to give you the information in real time, it's going to be accurate, and now you're accountable. They might not want that, and some may. Now a developer, I talked about a commoditized developer. You're not changing the culture of development. You're saying rather than a commoditized person that's being told what to do every single day, whether by your dev manager or Jira, you will now talk directly to the business person. It's interesting how, as I go through from company to company, some developer has, they think, you tell them, who's the business? Say that's the BA. They've never actually talked to the actual business person, right? Or the product owner, whatever you call them in your organization. Now you're saying that you're changing the culture of development and saying you're not only responsible for talking to the business, understanding the problem, and suggesting a solution. You're also responsible for the quality of the software, a bunch of things. They may not want that. That's an interesting thing that I learned. Some developers may not want that level of accountability. Some do. But again, it makes sense after many, many years of commoditizing developers, saying that's something that happens offshore. So it does make sense that that can happen. Resistance, right? When you change the system, hence the matrix, when you change the system, you will encounter 4 types of resistance, or 4 types of people. And my again, is anecdotal, based on no study other than my experience, right? So you can do whatever you want with it. The first person that I encounter are, and you have to find, are the Neos, the Mr. Andersons. These are the people that are going to help you. They're going to help you infect and make the change, right? They're key people to spot, and they usually kind of look like that. Right? They're the people that say, he's a troublemaker. Oh, really? Can you show me the troublemaker? I love the troublemaker, right? They're important, if you're a coach, to spend a lot of time with this type of developer, if they're still there. I think the best example of this is Johnny Ives, right? When Steve Jobs, if you've seen the movie, when Steve Jobs, or read the book, came back, Johnny Ives kind of looked like that. Still kind of shut up and that. And Johnny Ives is now Johnny Ives. Then there's Mr. Smith, where the actual explicit organizational antibodies, and they manifest themselves in many, many ways, right? But the thing I like about Mr. Smiths is they understand the fundamental business problem. They are cynical. When you convert a Mr. Smith, they are your best ally, right? And the thing I like about them, and never try to shut them up even if you have a CIO mandate, is a lot of times they mean well. They're trying to protect a system that they understand. The most dangerous is obviously Cypher. Hold on. Have you guys seen The Matrix? I'm just making sure because I'm just making sure you've seen The Matrix. I'm seeing a lot of glazed looks. Cypher is the most dangerous. People go, oh yeah, I'm all for agile transformations, fantastic stuff, right? Also known, if you've come from America, these are called the grin effers, right? That's fantastic. But in the background, they are really toxic to what you're trying to do, right? We can discuss later what I suggest. I'm not that anyone's going to physically kill any of you people, but if you ignore the culture of the organization, you're doomed. Any Game of Thrones fans here? Ned Stark ignored the culture, and his head was chopped off in the first season, right? Even though we all love Ned Stark, right? You cannot afford to ignore the culture you're in. You need to understand it. You need to understand the people, right? Again, agile transformation is not how do I split my user story. That's much ado about nothing, right? It's about true fundamental cultural change. Next thing is eat your own dog food in terms of the transformation. It's funny to me that even though we believe in sort of the agile, if you're doing Scrum or the agile principles, get an end-to-end slice and get that into production, right? As fast as possible. Production is the most important thing. Don't try to boil the water, all these kinds of things. But then when we take a step back and try to work on one of our agile transformations, try to transform an entire region. Don't do that, right? Create almost a backlog of the organization that you've been asked to transform. I mean, the first thing I've been when I'm asked to scale something is I said, no, we're not going to scale anything yet. First, we're going to have to create a backlog of the organization, And here's the critical part: pick the right slice. Right? Pick the right slice. What of the organization are you going to go after? I suggest two things when picking the right slice. First, what is your greatest likelihood to succeed? It's about getting wins early in the beginning, right? Creating pull. What's your greatest likelihood to succeed? Second, one that actually has a real business problem, right? Because you need a sense of urgency. So for example, if you have a system in the US, a mainframe system that's kind of 30 years old, kind of doing their thing, why would you transform it? And the problem may be one of flow. Why would you introduce Scrum? What is the problem, right? So pick a slice based on a real business problem and one that you have a high chance of success, right? First thing, if someone asks you to transform something into Safe, Scrum, whatever you want decide to pick, ask why. What is the problem? And a lot of times, you'll get a glazed stare and say, well, the CIO said we should do it, or somebody said we should do it, or all the cool people are doing it. That's not good enough. Don't scale, because I just mentioned it's really hard, right? So you need to have a reason. I'll talk more about that in a sec. Second thing is create an agile team, right? It cannot be one person. It has to be a group of individuals, right? And the group of individuals that I worked with are some amazing guys, including some of the speakers here. We were a group of 5 people, and we were like a Scrum team. We met every single day. We had a stand-up, who's working on what, and that kind of thing. So make sure you have a team, eat your own dog food, have daily stand-ups. Don't be all waterfall and big bang, right? The thing that kills a lot of agile transformations is this idea of we've done agile, we've succeeded. They declare success, we're doing stand-ups. You don't succeed until you're getting production software, and high quality production software that's valuable to the business in regular increments, right? So in the same way that we encourage the teams to get production software in, get early wins. Don't do sort of big bang agile transformations. It's not lost on me that I'm about to give a baseball example in England. But it's a good story, I promise. Has anyone heard of Billy Beane? Yeah? You know everything, right? And this is just to drive the point on getting the early wins, getting the wins early. So Billy Beane was a baseball manager for the Oakland Athletics, a general manager. And he had one of the weakest, or sort of smallest payrolls in a game system, right? He had, I think, $40 million, but the Yankees had $180 million or something like that. So how is he going to compete? And I guess the equivalent here would be Chelsea against Fulham. How are they going to compete with that kind of payroll? So a Harvard statistician that he met had this idea that players are being selected all wrong. They're just being selected based on how, their looks, their stats. But if you do a statistical regression and compare them with basically a whole idea called sabermetrics in his book, he believes he can take that team and create a winning team, right? But in order to do that, he had to shun the way things were done in baseball for many, many years, which is you had an established group of people called scouts that went and got the best talent. And it was a cottage industry, right? So he basically said, you know what, I'm going all in on the sabermetrics. And who were the first people that went against him? The scouts, and then all of baseball. So this is ridiculous. And he had some dips. But then something interesting, he kept on learning, right? In the whole minimum viable product, he would actually have a theory, him and his Harvard statistician, he would try and he would fail. And everyone would laugh at him as he was failing. But what happened was, within the same season, he had the longest winning streak in the history of baseball, 20 winning games straight, right? With a subpar team, all based on this idea of statistical-based analysis. So all of a sudden, the loser became the winner, right? But the key thing he had wasn't that he didn't declare success that he was now doing this awesome new methodology called sabermetrics or Scrum or Kanban, whatever. He only declared success when he had a 20-game winning streak. Right? And he didn't even have to declare success. The industry declared success, and then the Boston Red Sox, one of the big teams like Manchester United, they offered him $10 million a year to be their coach. Not that you guys are going to get offered that much to be, if only. So again, get real wins early, right? Start small and get real wins. That creates a pull, right? And I've learned this the hard way, trying to transform too much too soon. But when you transform and a team is starting to deliver into production and talking to the business or to the product owner, it creates this pull where people are like, we want some of that. We want, can you come help me? Can you come help me? Last lesson. I always find it interesting, because I work with large investment banks that have huge budgets. Like, this project is $20 million a year. And I tell them, yeah, we're going to put the best process in place. But that does not deter from the fact that you need the best people from the industry. You need the Facebook people, the people that Facebook's trying to get and Google's trying to get. Oh, but they're too expensive. We can't pay them that much. Remember, the anti-pattern of commoditized developers. When we pay how much? That's not to say that certain parts of the bank don't spend a lot of money on developers. That's absolutely, high-frequency trading does, quants are, but a lot of the service organizations do not spend top dollar on the best engineering talent, even though they have huge budgets, right? Ken Schwaber had this great quote where they asked him, so what if you have a crappy team and you put Scrum on top of the crappy team, what happens? He's like, you find out that they're crappy earlier rather than later. Right? So putting in the best process, the best tooling, the best whatever, it does help and does give you transparency, but that doesn't mean you don't hire the best. And hiring the best means hiring the best engineers, hiring the best product people. I can't underestimate, I'm working with an amazing product person right now, and it makes the world a difference. A visionary product person that knows what he wants, not afraid of the detail. A lot of the times, again, because of the anti-patterns I discussed, those people don't exist. Organizations need to hire those people, right? Hire the best coaches, right? This is not a plug for me, but you do need to hire the best coaches that have gone through, the pain of a lot of this kind of stuff. They can be a catalyst to this process. So I really want to kind of run through some things so we can get to questions, because that's my favorite part. But I want to finish on a couple of notes, right? The point of this conference is, or the headline of the conference is Agile, the Next Frontier. I think the next frontier is, in terms of agility and Scrum and a lot of these methodologies, not very interesting to me, right? I think what's interesting is the next frontier in terms of the business and what's happening. There's a joke in financial services that we hope Google doesn't get involved and decide to go into financial services, right? The thing is, they are. If Google now allows you to email each other money, right? I have a friend of mine that every time he sends me an opinion, he sends me 2p. Right? The next frontiers in terms of business is Bitcoin. If you're in the healthcare services, Google's getting into EMRs and that kind of stuff. The level and the rate of innovation is mind-boggling. Bitcoin. A lot of large financial companies even kind of haven't wrapped their head around Bitcoin yet, right? But this stuff is coming. The next frontier is these companies, a lot of companies are now getting into these services that we thought were protected, right? So a lot of times people say, well, you just told me a really bad story. This is very, very hard. Why should I do this, right? Because you have no choice. That's why. You have no choice, right? The industry is moving at such a rapid pace. The Elon Musks of this world are deciding to, go into space now, and you have the Google guys doing life extension, and now Apple Pay is getting into banking and PayPal and all this kind of stuff. The truth is, right, if companies are to remain viable, And these services companies, they have to start adopting these models and go through this pain. So let me just see if I've met my definition of done. And if I have, please tweet me. If I haven't, email me, because my wife reads my tweets and will make fun of me. But I really am interested. But hopefully you have an idea of why they're so difficult, right? Why Agile adoption is so difficult. And in terms of the 4 things I want you to remember, to think about, it really is all about culture and people. If it's not hard, you're not doing it right. Right? If it's not hard and painful, and again, that's why having a team is so important, so you can commiserate, and share the ups and the downs. Get the wins early. Getting wins early when you're doing an adoption, nothing will help your success like success, right? And hire the best people you can.